Let me share my screen. Hey. So in the me so in the meantime, everyone else is joining. Thanks a lot for joining the second session of the VizConnect Tableau Prep Academy. We hope the first session was impactful for you. You were able to understand some of the basic understanding of Tableau Prep Builder. Just to go ahead and reiterate the program again, I will directly jump to the program slide and just to talk about the whole program over here once again. So this week we have already completed introduction to the program and Tableau Prep Builder. If you have missed the session, the program will be recorded and it will be posted in the VizConnect YouTube channel. I will go ahead and share that link with you. Also, in the last email, we have shared a LinkedIn group for you, which you should go ahead and join because all the resources, best practices, we have gone ahead and posted in that particular group over there. That is also, I will share it with you in just a moment. So today's session, Jared will talk about aggregation and data densification. He will also talk about some of the features of Tableau Prep, and this will be more in terms of how you can go ahead and use the product. Next week, we will again go ahead and join back, which is on 20th. And in that particular session, we will have a hands-on challenge, which together we will go ahead and solve. And that particular session will be of 2 hours. Just a prerequisite, I will go ahead and send the prerequisite on the email also after the session today. But please go ahead and download Tableau Prep Builder and install it in your machine because you will go ahead and use it during the session. So this is something I am excited about. And without further ado, I will now hand it over to Jared. Jared, over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, so last time we did an introduction into Tableau Prep, why it was built, why it functions the way it does, and started really getting in depth into some of the features of that. So I do want to finish up on some of those features, but then the reason why we wanted to have a session dedicated to aggregation and densification is because aggregation and Tableau Prep is different. It's a different concept than Tableau Desktop. And data densification is just something that the more you work with data preparation, you might find yourself doing. I say data densification, but that can encompass scaffolding as well, which would really just be filling the gaps in your data set, right? Like if you're using calendar tables or things like that. So really wanted to be able to talk about those concepts and why Tableau Prep is useful for applying those. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can kind of round out some of the initial features we were talking about. Let me see. So I pulled up the Superstore sample flow again, just because it kind of does showcase a lot of the built-in features that you can use with Prep. And last time where we left off, we were talking about grouping. So we had just done grouping with the name field here. We grouped the names. I think we used spelling. And so what I wanted to talk about is basically what I was really showcasing last week and trying to make sure that there's an understanding of as you use Tableau Prep is the built-in features, right? Like there's definitely calculations similar to Tableau Desktop, but really the powerful thing is going to be the built-in features that you can use just by clicking. And so when you get stuck on something, you've got specific cleansing tasks that you're trying to perform. The main point or the main suggestion I have would be to always check this drop down to see what's available there first before trying to dive into any complicated calculations. And so, again, we talked about filtering. So you can filter based on a calculation. You can filter selected values like you would in Tableau, ranges. The cleaning step, here, if I come over here, so cleaning, you've got uppercase, lowercase, you can remove letters, you can remove punctuation, you can remove spaces. So there's a lot of really quick things that you can do there without having to write those calculations. We talked about grouping values. You can manually group values by selection, or you can use those pronunciation, character spelling algorithms. Splits, we talked about differences between automatic and custom splits. A lot of the time you really can use the automatic split. I tend to just use custom split because I have more control over it, and I want to make sure that I'm confident in the result that it's giving me. Um, but what I wanted to touch on as well is for dates specifically. There's some quick and easy conversion options for dates. So if you can see when I click here on region, that option's not there because this is a string field. But when I click on order date, because it's a date field, right? So now I've got these options here. And so I've got convert dates, right? And whenever I hover over convert dates, it's going to give me a list of options. So there is a difference, right, between date and date time. So date time would have that little clock symbol there. So if I click date time, it's going to have that little clock there. So that's the first option, right? Year number, quarter number, month number. So these other options here are useful, right? They might not seem, depending on like if you have a date field, you usually want it to stay a date field. But if I wanted to embed additional information into my flow, for example, I know I'm going to want it broken up by quarter, or I want a filter, like a really easy year filter. Instead of having to create a date part or date trunk, date name, a calculation like that, I could really just kind of duplicate this field here. I could call this quarter. And then I could convert the date to quarter number. And so now I've baked into my data set those quarter numbers. So as new data comes in, it's going to continue to give me those quarter numbers. And so there's quick and easy things that you can do to expand your data, add more information into it, add those quarters, add those month names. There's different reasons why you would want to do that. And so it just makes it really easy too. Another thing is the ability to create a custom fiscal year. And so a lot of the times, what you'll have is businesses will start their fiscal year in like February, or sometimes they even start it towards the end of the year in like October. And so what this allows you to do is it allows you to bake that into your data set, right? So if I wanted to say either quarter, month, year number, right? So we can define which level we're setting. But if I wanted to set my fiscal year, I could start it in October, right? Or actually, let me go back real quick. Let me duplicate this first. Call this fiscal year. I'm going to convert my date into a custom fiscal year. I'm going to select the year number. I'm going to start my year in October. And so you can see that the November 22nd date in 2016 belongs to the 2017 fiscal year. And so that's just another really easy way that you can create that without trying to do some custom or some complicated calculations or just kind of having to work harder to create that. So I just wanted to cover that real quick again, just to reinforce if you need to do some basic cleaning operations, you can most likely find that here. And then if you can't find it here first, then you can start going the route of creating calculations and doing it that way. But this has a lot of really powerful, quick and easy cleaning features. Okay. The next thing that I wanted to touch up on before we get to aggregation is the visual calculation editor. So, of course, if you wanted to create a calculated field, you can click Create Calculated Field here, and it will pop up the familiar window. You can right-click on a field and click Create Calculated Field. And then if you click Custom Calculation, it's going to pop up that familiar window again. But if you want to create some calculations and you need some help, right? Like let's say you need to do an LOD or you need to do a rank. but you're not quite sure how you want to do it. You just need that help to make sure you're putting it together the right way. That's what the visual calculation editor is for. So I'm gonna go over to sales. So let's say I wanted to, in my data set, I want to make sure that there is a rank in there as part of the data set, right? When I bring it into Tableau, I don't want to use table calculations. I want that rank to already be a part of my data set. So if I were to right-click sales here, go to create calculated field, and then come to rank here, that's going to pop up this visual editor. And so this really breaks down the calculation to help guide me in creating it. And so you can see it shows a preview of the rank, right? It's got these two sections. We've got rank, we've got a group by section, we've got an order by section. And so right now, what we're telling it to do is we're just saying there's no selection here in group by. And so we're just ranking sales. And it looks like we're doing it in descending order. So highest values are going to be ranked lower, and then lower values are going to be ranked higher. That's great. But what if I don't just want every row to have its own rank. I want to make sure the ranks are based by region, right? So I could then say group by region. And then so now the ranks here are going to be restarting every region. So if I come down, so it's only showing me central. So let me just click done real quick. And then let me click, oh, that's because I'm only in the central region. Hold on. Come down here, do it over here. Move that calculation. Okay, so this is the data set with all of my regions. And I'm just going to create a clean step here just to put that calculation. Okay, so create calculated field, rank. I want to group by region, and it's going to order by sales in a descending order. So now if I click done, where is my region? So if I click on central, right? So we can see here in calculation one that we've got those ranks, right? And then if I click east, you can see it still starts over at 1. So that's what that group by field is doing. And then you can see even over here, it creates that calculation. So if I try to edit it, it's going to bring up the visual editor again. But really what it's done here is it's creating a calculation utilizing partition and order by. And so this is what you have to use whenever you're writing out any type of rank inside of Tableau Prep. And so if we wanted to create the same thing, right, I could create a calculation here and say partition. And so what partition is doing, the way that I think of it, I'm sure it's not the formal definition, but the way I think of it is basically restarting. So if I want to use a rank, what value do I want it to restart at? So like with region, I want it to restart in every region. So restarting every region, give me a rank of what, right? So restarting every region. And then I have to also use the order by function to say I need to order it by, because I need to order it by something. I can't just use the rank function by itself because it doesn't know what it's ranking. So I have to tell it what to rank and how to order that rank. So I would say order by sales. And by default, it's going to order in a descending order. But if I wanted to, I could say I want it to be ascending, right? So order by sales in an ascending order. Now I can use rank. So again, all I'm saying here is, so partition by region. So restarting every region, give me a rank that's ordered in ascending order by sales. So that's what the visual editor is helping you put together. I did see, I think I saw a hand let me see if I can pull up the chat real quick. Shoot.
So, Jared, there is a question by Emma. So if you
Okay.
want to take it right now. So she
Yeah.
is asking, is it possible to have it create a budget period, year-based, on the start and end date of a project? We have grants at our organization, and each award has its own unique budget period. We need to be able to track which budget period grant is in year 1, 2, and 3, etc.
So in that case, you would most likely need to just define a calculation in saying like, okay, if this was, let me see, like if you were working with, I don't know, if we said if project, right, if project was equal to project A or whatever the case may be, then or hold on, let me see. We would want to define, say, if we've got project 1, then well, maybe you could do that based on the date fields. I'm trying to think here how we would go about that. Um, Creating date ranges based on that project. But you might be able to use the custom fiscal year, but you would just have to basically use it based on each project. I'll have to think about that one because I understand the problem. Like I understand what you need to do with it. Just trying to think of the best way to do it in prep without creating too many unnecessary columns. And also, it would also depend on how it's structured. Like, um, is the data set you're working with like multiple dates per project in the same data set, but each of those dates need to be confined to a specific budget period? Yeah, send it to me on LinkedIn and I'll take a look at it, especially if you can send me like even like a mock or like an example anonymized version of the data you're working with, then I can definitely help with the solution there. All right, so we've covered the calculation editor or the visual editor. There's a couple other calculations you can do there too that I want to touch on real quick. We touched on rank. Let me see if I can find another one. So sales, let's do an LOD, right? So this is why, again, that I wanted to do aggregation as its own session because of things like this. I get asked a lot, how come prep can't do like include and exclude LODs? How come prep can only do fixed LODs? And then there's sort of this break in understanding of why would I do a fixed LOD inside of Tableau Prep. There's definitely some use cases there. There's reasons to do it, but it's not the same reasons as in Tableau Desktop, right? The main purpose of level of detail calculations in Tableau Desktop is that you're working with a data set already. Like this is the data set you have to work with. This is how it's structured, and visually you want to be able to represent it at a specific granularity. You want to be able to represent it at a different granularity than the data set is pulling in. So that's why you would use include, that's why you'd use exclude, and that's why you'd use fixed. Well, with Tableau Prep, you're designing the data set to be at that level of granularity that you want it to be at. So you wouldn't necessarily need the ability to use include and exclude and fixed, because include and exclude are really just subsets of fixed, right? At fixed, you're fixing it to a specific level of detail. But for include and exclude, that is solely dependent on what you have in the view in Tableau Desktop. And so, like if I was Let me pull up Tableau Desktop just to make sure that I'm that the understanding is there. So if I connect to Superstore and I pull in sales and I pull in region, where is region? Okay, so I've got region and I've got sales. So you can see here my sales across region. But what if I wanted to show for every region in the view, what I'm looking at in my view, I just want to show the sales across all of the regions for every row, right? So we could do this, we know we can do this with fixed, right? So if I create a calculated field and say total sales and say fixed, let me increase the size of that and say fixed at, just fixed, give me the sum of sales, right? So what this is doing is just saying fixed, and since I've got no dimension here, I'm fixing my sum of sales at the level of the entire data set. It doesn't matter what dimensions, categories I have here in my view. It's just going to aggregate based on the level of detail I'm fixing it to, and I'm fixing it to the level of detail of the data set. So if I click OK here and drag this to text, now I've got the total sales for all of the regions, right? But this is where include and exclude come in. So if I wanted to say, I still want to just use total sales, but I don't want to use fixed, I want to use exclude, then I'll say exclude region and give me the sum of sales. Increase that. So this is why, so include and exclude again are dependent on what is in my view. So what this calculation is saying is I know I'm going to have region in my view, but I want to have an aggregated sum of sales that doesn't take region into consideration. So I'm going to click OK here, and I'm going to drag that to my measures here. And so again, it looks exactly the same as the fixed calculation because I'm saying give me the sum of sales excluding the region that I have here on the view. So in Tableau Prep, again, I don't need exclude because I have no view. There's nothing I'm visualizing this data on yet. I'm able to give myself that level of detail here in the data set before I ever take it to desktop. Now, the reason why fixed is still a part of the data set or part of Tableau Prep is because there is reasons why I would use that. For example, if I wanted to get a, let's say I wanted percent of total to be baked into my data set. Word of caution there, don't over aggregate your data. Don't do more than you have to do, but maybe I do, right? Maybe I know exactly how I want the data to come out. I want that percent of total in there. And so what I would do is first, I would need a way to calculate the percent of total. Again, Tableau Prep doesn't aggregate anything. Everything in Tableau Prep is at the row level. So I can't say, right, I can't come in here and say, give me the sum of sales because it's going to give me an error. The reason why I can't just say, give me sum of sales is because Tableau aggregates based on what's in the view, Tableau Desktop. So Tableau Desktop here is aggregating my sales based on what I have in the view here. And so if I've got nothing in the view, let me remove these. So if I've got nothing in my columns and rows, then Tableau Desktop knows, well, I'm just summing up all of the sales in the data set. Well, Tableau Desktop, again, you're not placing these on a canvas. You're just looking at row level data. So when you say, give me sum of sales, what you're really saying is for this one row of data, that's here, right? For this one row of data, give me the sum of sales. Well, that's the same as the sales value. So that's why you would want to use an LOD in this case. So if I come back into my visual calculation editor, and you can see here we've got fixed LOD. And so it looks similar to ranking. So we've got, we start with no group. And then it says, do we want to do min sales? Do we want to do sum? Here's uh, all of our aggregations that we can do now because we're using the fixed LOD. So we're just saying fixed. I don't want to group it by anything because I'm trying to bake in percent of total sales. And so the field that I'm trying to create here is total sales. So I'm just saying, give me some sales fixed at the data set. So let me click done. Let me rename that. And so now you can see what I've got here. Let me widen this. So now what I've got is one field, or I've got a new field, right? So I've got total sales, and every value in the total sales column is exactly the same. This is exactly what happens when you create an LOD in desktop. So now I could use this to create a percent of total. So now I could create a calculation and say, I want sales divided by total sales. I want to call this percent of total. And I'm just going to go ahead and multiply this by 100 to just give me that readable percent, right? So times 100. And so I can see that's what this, and again, this data set is at a lower level of granularity. But basically the sale amount for this order is equal to 0.37% of the total sales. And again, I was able to do that by using an LOD to give me that proper aggregation. So you can see the calculation there, fixed at the entire data set because there's no dimension there, give me sum of sales. And so there's, other reasons or applications for that would be maybe you're trying to embed averages into your data set. You've got minimum, maybe you've got minimum values you're trying to bake into your data set. So again, there's reasons why fixed would be used. So that's why they've got it in here. And we're going to show how aggregation or the aggregate step basically does the same thing. But I see a couple of questions over here. I'm not able to see the Q&A chat for some reason. I can only see the regular chat, but I do see a couple of questions. I see one from Shaw M that says, if the sales went up in 2021 from 2020 if the sales went up in 2021 from 2020, how do you find what is contributing to growth? That would be a Tableau desktop question. So you know, clean up your data here, then you move that to Tableau desktop to start analyzing, pulling in things to figure out what exactly is contributing to that growth. You can do some analyzing and try to clean up some of the data sets here to get a subset to try and answer that question. But most likely with a question like that, where it's kind of a little bit more general, you're probably having to pull into Tableau desktop to answer it. Let's see. If I wanted to calculate the percent order, I see a question from Patricia. So how should the calculation be if you want to calculate the percent order? So are you asking if I wanted to calculate the like how many orders occurred in a certain region, something like that? Like if I wanted to say this region had 20% of the orders across the total. Percent of order by product. So if I wanted to calculate which products were accounting for the percentage of orders, what if you want the order or level? I'm not exactly sure. If you message me that question in a little bit more detail on LinkedIn, I'll get back to you on that one. Yep. Okay. So we've talked about calculation editor, talked about level of detail, and that's important because now we're going to talk about the aggregation step. Let me just create an aggregation here. So aggregate step, right? What you see when you click on the aggregate step is you've got two sections. You've got grouped fields, you've got aggregated fields. And if you are uncomfortable with a level of detail or it really still hasn't clicked exactly what level of detail calculations are doing, this step will really help build that understanding because this step is similar, like I said, to what a fixed LOD is doing. So for grouped fields, for example, if I said what I'm trying to aggregate here in this step is I need the sales aggregated to each category. So if I want to bring in sales to my aggregated fields, and then I want category in grouped fields. Okay, cool. Now I've got the category and sales amount. So I've got 3 rows here, right? And then I've got 3 rows here. And so what I'm saying here would be the same thing as me saying fixed at the category, return the sum of sales. So I could write a calculation that says exactly that. So like if I came back over here to my clean step and created a calculation that said category sales, say fixed at the category, give me my sum of sales. And so you can see I've got 3 values here. 1.193, 1.207, 1.319. So if I come back up to my aggregate step, it's the same values. The difference here is when I'm using the aggregate step, I'm returning a subset of my data based on that aggregation. Whereas when I use a LOD here, that value is going to be duplicated across all of the rows it applies to. But again, that's a really important thing. The more that you sort of play with this step, it will continue to help you build that understanding of what an LOD is doing, but then what the aggregation is doing. And so we talked about Tableau Prep being at the row level, right? It can't aggregate anything at the row level. You have to aggregate it using this step. That's why this exists. That's why we're not using a calculation to do this. We're using a step that's basically pulling in the same aggregation as you would in desktop, right? So it's doing the same thing there as well. So if I come into desktop, I've got sum of sales here, and I pull in category, where is right here, category. And so what I'm saying here is group by category, aggregated field is sum of sales. So it's the same concept. It's just that in Tableau Desktop, the grouped by section is based on what you have in your rows, columns, and detail. But in Tableau Prep, it's based on what you've got actually laid out clearly for you. And so what we've seen so far is I'm going to delete some of this real quick too. So we can create an LOD, right? I created an LOD called category sales. And then I've got the aggregate step here that's got category sales. But I could also, if I didn't want to use LODs, I could also do this, which is something that you'll see a lot of the times the more you use prep. I've got an aggregation happening here. I need to return my sales at the category level, but then I want to bring this value back into my data set because I want my full data set to have that category sales value. So here's where I could take this and join this back. Let me pull this up a bit. Here we go. So I can take my aggregate step and join it back to my main flow here. And then you can see already it automatically detects that there is category fields. So it's two columns named the same thing over here. So that's what it's going to join on. And what I can do now, I can see here, let me see. I go to my list view. So you can see one thing that Tableau Prep does really well is helps you keep track of where things are coming from. So we did a join just now, but if we looked at our original table here, I've got a value, a column called sales down here. And then if I look at my aggregate step, this aggregation is also called sales. So when I join them together, how do I make sure that I'm using the right value or I'm not losing track of that? But because my clean step here is yellow and my aggregate step here is blue, my join step, when I look at my list of fields, it keeps that color here. So you can see these columns all have that yellow square rectangle there, and then the aggregate steps, the columns that came from the aggregate step, has the blue tint to it. And it even takes that sales name and adds a -1 to it. And so what I could do here, because I know this is coming from my aggregate step, I can now call this category sales, and I don't need the duplicated category field. So that just makes it easy. And when I look at my clean step here, if I come over here to the right, so that category sales field here now, it's doing the same thing that the LOD was doing. So again, I'm just trying to reinforce that the fixed LOD is very similar to the aggregate step, because all we're doing here in the aggregate step is we're basically saying return the sum of sales fixed at the category level. But here, again, we're returning 3 rows versus attaching this value to every row in the data set. Again, a bunch of different reasons why you would want to bring that into the data set. But this aggregate step also functions to help you pre-aggregate your data, right? So if you were going to be doing a high-level analysis, maybe you're making an executive-level dashboard, and really the only thing you're concerned with is daily sales. You don't need customer names. You don't need, maybe you don't need product names. Maybe you don't even need manufacturers. Maybe the only thing they're concerned with is how are sales in our regions, states, profit, how is profit and discount related to that? So you could do aggregations and pre-aggregate your data here to give you a smaller, more performant data set to work with. So that's another main reason to use prep, is to make sure that you're only working with the data that you need in your analysis and not working with all of this extra data that's going to slow down your workbook. And it's just going to, clutter it up with a lot of values that you're probably not going to end up using anyways. So always keep that in mind as you're cleaning through the data. Just because you have 100 columns doesn't mean you really need to keep 100 columns. So that is, again, that's really the key thing I wanted to touch on here with aggregation. Again, if you've got more questions on it, please hit me up, message me, let me know. I do have a video also on YouTube specifically going over this concept of aggregation, combining it with LODs, and how it helps make sense. Again, I would say if you're struggling with level of detail calculations in desktop and struggling to understand what they're doing, I really encourage you to use this aggregate step, play around with it a bit, even try creating the sort of aggregation you're looking for in desktop to help you break that understanding. So, again, if I wanted to fix at, customer, right? So now I bring in customer name. This is giving me the total sales for each customer. So fixed by customer, sum sales. It's the same thing. So like I said, I encourage you to play around with that to help increase that understanding. Last thing I want to touch on is, or I guess it's last two things, scaffolding and data densification. Scaffolding can mean different things. The way I typically think of it is you've got like a frame, a framework of your data set. So calendar tables are the best example for it, right? You've got a data set that you know is going to have values on certain dates, but you want the data set to have a value for every date. And so you have a calendar table that just has a list of all of your dates that you're joining that table to make sure that you're basically filling in the gaps. And so when I say I think of it as a framework, think of scaffolds as in construction scaffolds, right? You've got this skeleton, you've got this frame, so that would be your calendar table, and you're attaching the rest of the data to it because you know not every row of your data is going to have a date, but you want to make sure those dates are there. And so you're just filling in or attaching the data where it can be attached. Sometimes scaffolding is used to reference just filling in blank values. So you've got some rows of data, and instead of attaching them to a calendar table, you want to just fill in those gaps with the dates in between. So sometimes the word scaffolding, data scaffolding, is used for that purpose. And then data densification, of course, is just when you're trying to create more points in your data set to create curved lines, Sankey's, sigmoid charts, things like that. And so I'm not going to touch too far into that concept. I will touch on it a little bit, but really the more important thing to touch on here is scaffolding. And calendar tables are really useful. I got a question on incremental workflows. I'll answer that one here in a second. So scaffolding, actually, let me come back to here. So if I've got dates in here, and I'm going to remove these calculations. If I've got dates in here and I just want to make sure that there is a day for every date in my data set. Let's say I'm trying to create a visualization that is an actual calendar. If I were to, let's say, come here to new rows. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. Okay, so there's a couple ways we can do this. The way it's typically done, either in your database or in an Excel sheet, you've just got a list of dates. And maybe it's just for the year, maybe it's for the next 10 years, maybe it's for the next 20 years. You've just got a table that has a date field and it has a value for every single day that's coming now and in the future to be able to tie your data to. But with Tableau Prep, you can actually do this inside of the flow. You can make it dynamic. You can make it as big or as little as you need it to be. And it's something I use very frequently. So what I usually do here is I will try to identify the first date in my data set. So let's say if I'm going by order date. So I'm going to come here and we'll use the visual editor, right? So let me say, let's say I want to find the first order date in my data set. So I'll create a fixed LOD using the visual editor, and you can see it's actually already fixed on the order date. So minimum order date, it returns that January 3rd, 2015 date. Awesome. I can call this, I'm actually going to call this start date. And I'm going to convert that to a date field or to date. Instead of a date time, I just want a date. So now I have, by using an LOD, I was able to get the very first order date in my data set. But I want to make sure there is a value for every day in the year. I want to make sure this goes back to January 1st. So what I could do there really easily, I'm going to create a custom calculation, and I'm going to call it start date. And the cool thing about Tableau Prep that I very much enjoy is that whenever you create a new field and you name it the same thing as a field that already exists, it's going to just replace that field. So you don't have to get into this habit of duplicating it, creating a new calculation, then deleting the old one, you can just create new calculations that have the same name and it will replace the previous one. And so I'll do this as well a lot of the times where I've kind of layer into what a calculation means, and each time I'm just replacing what the previous meaning is. So here I've got a start date. I'm going to do date. I'm going to do a date trunk. I'm going to truncate this at the year. I'm going to use start date. Let me delete this one over here. And so what I'm doing is I'm saying truncate my start date at the year level and then wrap that in a date function, because date trunc typically returns date time. And so I just want it to be a date. So when I click save here, you can see now my date goes back to January 1st. There's my start date. Now I need my end date. So I'd do the same thing. I'd come over here to order date, create calculated field, fixed LOD, but now I'm going to use the max. So this is the max order date in my data set because I didn't group by anything. It's just giving me the maximum order date in the data set. And so again, what I'm going to do is rename this one end date. I'm going to create a calculated field, call it end date. I'm going to say date, date trunc, year, end date. There we go. So now I've got I guess I don't want to truncate that one at the year. Here's what I can do instead then. What I can do instead, if I want it to be to always have the end value of the year, so December 31st, what I could just say then is make date. I'll do year of end date. Was it year, month, day? Yeah, so 12/31. That's what I'll do instead. So I know that the end value of my year is always going to be December 31st. What I'm making dynamic here is the year. And what I mean by that, by making it dynamic, is now that I've done it in this way, I used LODs to find the minimum date and the maximum date. My calendar table is always going to have exactly the number of years that I need in my data set. So, got a start date, we got an end date, right? Great. Okay, but now I need to create all of the dates in between. And you can see here that it duplicated, right? It created a date, that same date for every single row in my data set. I don't want that. I only want one row that has these dates. So what I can do here is use the aggregate step to deduplicate my data. What I mean by that is if I pull in start date and end date into my grouped fields, you can see I only get one row back, because what this aggregate field is really doing is it's saying for every unique pairing of these values, return me a row. That's how it's aggregating based on, like, even if I pull in values here to my aggregated fields, right? It's aggregating based on every unique combination of my grouped fields. So in this case, I'm not trying to aggregate anything. I'm just trying to group my data by every unique pairing of these two values. And there's only one unique pairing because there's only one value in each field. So now I only get one row of data, which is exactly what I want. So now what I can do here is I can pivot these to one row or one column. And so now I've got one column that has my start date and my end date. And then I'm going to use the new rows step. The new rows step is a step that does exactly what we're talking about. It scaffolds your data. It fills in the gaps. And so I've got one field that I want to use, right? It's going to ask me over here, how do you want to add new rows? I want to add the values from one field. And so I'm going to select the field, which is date. And then it allows me to select how I want that to come in. Do I want it to update the existing field, create a new one? And then how do I want it to increment? I can either create weekly or monthly or daily increments. I wanted one value for every day. And so you can see I started with one date here, right? I started with 2015, and you can see it gave me 1,460 new rows because it gave me a new row for every single date that is in between those dates. And so this would be my calendar table. calendar, right? And so now if I wanted to, I could create and make sure that my final data set has a date no matter what, even if nothing happened on that date. I could take this, join it to my calendar table. I can say I want, here, let me change my order date over here real quick. Where is order date? Okay, order date, I'm going to change to a date type. And then over here, I'm going to say date is equal to order date, and I'm also going to do a left join. So what I've done here is I've said, give me, right, whenever the date, the calendar date is equal to the order date, give me that row, but also give me every other row in the calendar table that does not have an order date associated with it. And so you can see in my calendar table here, it shows you whenever you do a join, it shows you the two tables that you're joining. It shows you the number of columns that are matched and mismatched in those tables, and then it shows you the result. So this is also something that you can use to really make sure that your joins are happening properly, that they're pulling in the fields that you need properly. And you can also narrow in and figure out why it's not joining if it's supposed to be. So for example, you can see down here in calendar, there's the stacked bar chart, right? So it says I've got 1,200 matched rows, but let's see, 225 unmatched rows. So if I was creating my data set and doing a join, and every single value should be matching up, there should be no unmatched values, I could come here and click the unmatched rows, and then it's going to pull up and show me those unmatched rows. So this is something that you can do again to narrow in and really do much quicker validation. Why is my data not joining? What's breaking here? If there was like specific order IDs that weren't joining here, I could go in, pull up those order IDs in my database and really try to figure out where's the disconnect. So validation is also another great use of Tableau Prep. There was one thing that there was one other thing I wanted to touch on here. Let's see, we talked about new row step, talked about aggregations, pivots. My mind went blank. I thought about it when we were talking about the start and end dates. Give me a second. Went over the joins. I'll have to think about it and bring it up on the next one. I know there's one other thing I want to talk about here, but I know we're running low on time, and so I did want to just make sure that we touched on those things, right? So we touched on a couple of the built-in features that we wrapped those up. Aggregation, why it's important, how it can help you understand LODs, how it's different than Tableau Desktop. Key thing there, just to touch up on one more time, Tableau Desktop is aggregating based on what's in your view, based on the rows, columns, what's in detail. Tableau Prep is just row level data. And so whenever you're creating a calculation here in a clean step, that calculation is being applied at the row level. It's not aggregating in any way. And so if you want to do an aggregation, you either have to use the aggregate step or you have to use an LOD calculation. So that is it for today. Next week, Wednesday, we will start a longer session, hands-on session. That is where we're going to be working together. We're going to be going through some things, some challenges together, really, getting more thorough, answering more questions, helping you really start getting your hands on it, working in it, using some of these features. And, like I said, as you go through it and there's questions, we're going to answer those all together. So I hope this is useful to you. I hope you're learning. I hope you're really seeing the power of Tableau Prep. And, I really hope to continue seeing you in the future meetings. I did see a question pop up. What was the I didn't see who had the question, but I saw a hand raise.
I think Jared, it's not there. Even I am not seeing any hands which are raised.
Okay, no problem. Like I said again, if you've got specific problems, things you're trying to solve, feel free to message me on LinkedIn. I'll try to help where I can. And that will also help me bring more, more content for the next few sessions. So, yeah, great learning.
Yes, I think there is one question from Chris. Jared, are there any external files which they will need for the next session, which is on hands-on?
I'm thinking there will be some external files needed, but we're going to provide all of that well in advance.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so Chris, you will go ahead and receive those files well in advance before the session. And just to reiterate, we will go ahead and send you the recording of today's session, all the resources, and also block your time for the upcoming session on Wednesday, which will be around 9:30 a.m. EST to 11:30 a.m. EST. So just remember, the next session will be 2 hours. In that, we will go ahead and give you an opportunity to do a hands-on exercise and help you deep dive into Tableau Prep Builder. Just a request again, please go ahead and join the LinkedIn group. I have already shared the link over here. Again, I will go ahead and put it. And also you will get it into the email follow-up email, which we will go ahead and share with you. The reason we are asking you to join the group because it will be easy for us to go ahead. If you have any questions, anything you have not understood, we'll be able to go ahead and track it well from there. And also share your feedback. Let Jared or myself know how we can improve it. As is our first session, and we really want to go ahead and make it more impactful. Jared, anything else you want to add?
No, yeah. Great job, everybody. Like I said, I hope you continue joining the next few sessions. The hands-on, the challenges is where we're going to really start expanding your learning of the tool. So hope to see you in those.
Awesome. Perfect. With that, thanks a lot, everyone, for joining the session. Thanks a lot, Jared. We hope you have a great weekend ahead. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.